Switzerland is a small mountainous country with a German-speaking majority sitting at the heart of Europe. But throughout World War II, it manages to stay neutral, somehow escaping Hitler's clutches despite most its neighbors falling to them. Here's how the Swiss did it. I'm Spartacus Olsson, and this is a World War II in real-time special episode on Swiss neutrality. Swiss neutrality is actually something laid down in international law. In the midst of the Napoleonic War in 1815, the European powers decree in both the Treaty of Paris and at the Congress of Vienna that Switzerland should remain permanently neutral to act as a buffer zone in the heart of Europe between France and the Austrian Empire. It's a similar idea to the promise of Belgian neutrality some decades later at the Treaty of London, only that time Belgium is supposed to be a buffer between France and Germany. But we all know how Belgian neutrality works out in both 1914 and 1940, so how come the Swiss managed to hold on to theirs? Well, for starters, Switzerland has some pretty impressive defensive capabilities. Switzerland is famous for its professional mandatory army. Every male from the age of 20 to 48 has to be trained for a minimum of 3 months and store government-issued military equipment in their homes. When war breaks out in September 1939, the retirement age is pushed back to 60, training is extended for 4 months, and 400,000 men, around 10% of the entire population, are mobilized. About 1/5 of them are sent directly to positions along the frontier, with the rest held in reserve to bolster defensive lines whenever the attack comes. Thing is, after the fall of France in the summer of 1940, the Swiss are literally surrounded by an openly expansionist power, Nazi Germany, who also incidentally believed that the 2/3 of Swiss citizens who speak German should live in their Reich. Not only that, but it's now clear to the Swiss that their current defensive strategy is hopeless against modern blitzkrieg tactics, which can easily slice through the weak points in the lines and be deep inside the country before anything can be done about it. At first, some Swiss leaders opt for a policy of appeasement. The head of foreign affairs, Federal Councillor Marcel Pilat Golas, delivers an infamous radio address on June 25th, where he announces a partial demobilization and warns his countrymen that they must be prepared to play a part in the new Europe. People throughout Switzerland are alarmed at this speech, especially as it sounds too similar to those coming out of newly established Vichy France. People are left demoralized and confused, so to rally the nation, Commander-in-Chief of the Swiss Army, General Henri Guisan, takes his entire senior officer corps of 500 men on a boat across Lake Lucerne to the meadow of Rütli, the fabled site where the old Swiss Confederacy was supposedly founded in the Middle Ages. There, he calls for the resistance against any and all invasion and to never give in to defeatism, and ignites new spirit of patriotism among the gathered troops and spreads throughout the country. On that meadow, Guisan also lays out his defensive strategy, and this now kicks into gear. It is an expanded version of the 19th century era defensive plan of a national redoubt, known to the Swiss as Schweizer Reduit, or Reduit National, or Ridotto Nazionale, or Reduit National, depending on which one you ask. It is almost apocalyptic in its cold logic. The driving rationale is that Switzerland can never win a war against Germany, but can make German victory so costly that it dissuades them from invading. Upon invasion, the bulk of the Swiss army is to retreat into a redoubt in the Alpine regions and a network of nearly impregnable fortresses. Any possibility of a paratrooper assault like that one that took place on the supposedly impregnable Belgian fortress Ibn Email can be forestalled by emplacements up and down the mountains, resulting in anti-aircraft fire from high and low. Hangared in tunnels in the mountains, Swiss planes can also dart out from the fortifications and engage enemy aircraft or bomb ground troops before safely getting behind the mountains again. On the ground, in the lowlands, border guards and civilian militias will be left to either effectively sacrifice themselves to slow the enemy advance or engage in guerrilla warfare once the region is occupied. Civilians themselves will be barred from entering the redoubt, and it would be life-threatening for them to do so, as all entrances will be booby-trapped. All infrastructure is to be blown up as the Swiss retreat. As one senior officer puts it, in our situation, there can only be one aim, to resist as long as possible. We want to go down fighting, leaving the aggressor only a totally devastated country without material or human resources of any kind. Almost apocalyptic, maybe, but Guisan's army is right to redouble its defensive efforts. Hitler does seem like he has plans to invade. In fact, according to some sources, he's pretty obsessed with the idea. Chief of Staff of German High Command, OKH, Franz Halder, will profess, I received repeatedly reports from the OKW, I naturally had my private sources there, about Hitler's fits of rage against Switzerland, which, based on his mentality, could possibly lead to sudden military demands on the army. Halder will offer several contradictory and unreliable accounts of his time as a Nazi general, so we can't say for sure how fitful Hitler's reported rages are. But we do know from various war diaries, minutes of meetings, and military orders that the Führer has at least given his tacit approval for the preparation of an invasion of Switzerland. The first set of plans are drawn up by Captain Otto Wilhelm von Menges. They undergo a series of changes and revisions until October 1940 and are eventually finalized under the name Operation Tannenbaum. Tannenbaum envisions a swift invasion of Switzerland, spearheaded by armor and air units to get behind the Swiss forces before they can retreat into the Alps. Halder himself contributes ideas on an infantry feint to draw the Swiss out into more open territory. With its finalization, German troops are amassed at the border, awaiting Hitler's orders to invade. But it doesn't come, and it never will. We don't know actually why Hitler doesn't give the order. Could be that the Swiss defensive capabilities really are intimidating enough to head off any invasion. But it could also be that the Nazi leadership simply don't think there is too much to gain from invading Switzerland, and that it's more useful to keep them as a neutral power, providing access to the outside world and some pretty unique services. And one of the most important services Switzerland provides is its infamous and secretive financial system. A couple of weeks ago, I did a special about how Nazi Germany looted cultural assets and gold from occupied countries. Well, not many countries are willing to buy looted Nazi gold, but the Swiss are more than happy to. Throughout the war, 4/5 of all Reichsbank gold shipments will travel via Switzerland. The Reichsbank will also deposit 1,638,000,000 Swiss francs worth of gold in Swiss banks, including its national bank. I should add for balance sake that the Swiss will buy similar amounts from the Allied countries, the small difference being that Allied gold is procured legally, Nazi gold not so much. Swiss financial services and industry appear to be closely connected to the crimes of the Nazi regime. Again, the Swiss do near equal amounts of trade with the Allies, even more so as the war turns against Germany, and there is no institutional affinity with Nazism driving these dealings. But that doesn't change the fact that Swiss companies still buy formerly Jewish-owned businesses on the cheap after they have been Aryanized by the Nazi regime. Swiss banks also lend money to firms such as IG Farben, a company which utilizes slave labor from concentration camps and produces Zyklon B, and fund the supply of military infrastructure to the Wehrmacht and SS. Tens of thousands of Swiss accounts are also made dormant due to their owners falling victim to Nazi persecution, with the assets either willingly handed over to the regime or left idle unbeknownst to the survivor or families of the victims. This isn't to say that the Swiss don't suffer as a result of the war raging around them. Many do, civilians and military alike. This is mainly due to continuous violations of its airspace throughout the entire war. Allied and Axis planes will make a total of 6,000 such incursions, and the Swiss Air Force, consisting of only 200 aircraft, is duty-bound to engage them. Swiss pilots are down trying to stop the Luftwaffe crossing their country in the French campaign, and later in the war, Swiss cities will bear 10 accidental attacks from Allied bombers. The most serious will see Schaffhausen, a city on the north bank of the Rhine, bombed by the U.S. Air Force, leaving 150 civilians dead, and America paying Switzerland $62 million in compensation. So that's how the Swiss survived the war. Once it's over, patriotic feeling will grip many Swiss people as they feel they have doggedly deterred a German invasion. The National Redoubt Plan is certainly brave, and if ever put into action would have been a heroic last stand for democratic Switzerland. But we shouldn't forget the reality of the situation. Brave though they were, the freedom of the Swiss depends on Hitler. As millions of Germans are pitting themselves against the might of the Soviet Union in ever-worsening conditions, one thing is clear. If Hitler wants somewhere invaded, it's getting invaded. The Swiss are also pretty well known for their cheese, so if you'd like to learn about how interwar Americans reinvented Swiss cheese, then make sure to check out the first episode of the second season of our Between Two Wars series. You can click on it right here any moment now. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Never forget.